Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be taking another look at Advanced Configurator. We're going to do a deep dive into the CML, see how you can create a new constraint model for a new product in Salesforce, and see the different rules that you can create and test them out as we go. So we'll go through a couple different examples. So the bundle that we've got created at this point is a robot. So we'll be doing the Advanced Configurator, going through the Advanced Configurator for that robot bundle. The key configurable aspects is, so we have a couple attributes that we have set up for that product. So mobility type, operating mode, adaptation level, payload capacity requirement, and max payload. And we have components. So we'll go into Salesforce and see what that bundle looks like. And then we'll see how we can create first the constraint model for that product. And then we'll go through and create different types of rules for that product. Let's first jump into Salesforce, see what the bundle looks like, and then we'll create the constraint model for this. So in Salesforce, if I take a look at my bundle for my product, right, the Advanced Delivery Robot Bundle, let's make this a bit bigger. So we've got the product itself, and then I have multiple groups of options. So if I click through, every group of option has a couple different options available. So no need to go through all of them for now, but really that's what we're going to be working with as we're setting up the constraint model. The other thing that we've got for this bundle is we have 5 different attributes that are available, most of them pick list, with one number field being the max payload in kilograms. So first thing we want to do if we want to set up Advanced Configurator for that new product is you need to head over to Constraint in the Salesforce menu. So look for constraints, click through on constraints. You're going to get taken to your list view for constraints. If you've got anything created, you'll see it now. This is a new environment, so I've got nothing built so far. But so what I want to do at this point is hit new constraint. And the new constraint, you're going to want to give that a name. So let's call it robot CML. API name autofills. Usage type you will define as constraint. Context definition, you want to make sure that you're using the context definition of the active pricing in your environment. So in this case, we'll use pricing transaction CD1. We'll hit save. Now, while this is loading, make sure if you don't know what the Advanced Configurator is, if you want to learn what it is first before going through that deep dive, I've got another video where we go through what it is, what it does, and a couple examples. Once your constraint is created, you want to click through on the constraint version that was just created. That's going to take you to the constraint builder where you can build your model. Right now, that's going to be empty, and you need to start to create that model first before we can create any rules. The first thing you will want to do on that constraint builder is to create a new type. So the new type is going to be your robot bundle. So let's call this robot bundle, and we'll hit create. Now this creates the type robot bundle, which is the parent for our bundle now, but we don't have any of the relationships yet or any of the attributes yet. So what we want to do is click on that robot bundle on the left-hand side under types. First thing we'll do at the bottom, we'll hit define type variables. And that's going to allow us to bring in all the attributes that have been created. So you can either create those as standalone or you can auto-generate variables based on product catalog management. So what this does is you look for your bundle in the lookup field, select your bundle, and it's going to pull in all the attributes that are already created against that bundle. So we'll leave everything that's selected, and we'll bring all of those in. It's save. And now we'll see that our type gets updated with a value for every one of our attributes. For the attributes that are pick list, we can see that the values are coming true. No default values for some. Some have default values. If we need to set a default value in the constraint builder, we can. For anyone that doesn't, if you already have a default value coming from product catalog management, that one will take over right now as you're creating this. So the setting a different value here would not work because the PCM value will take over. Second thing we want to do is bring in all the product options that we've got within our bundle. And to do that, at the bottom, you'll go from, right now you're under variables, you're going to want to go to relationships, you're going to hit define relationships. And again, you could create those relationships manually, but you can also auto-generate them from PCM as well. So you're going to click on product catalog management as the reference library, and you're going to, again, look for your product, select your bundle, and you should see all the available product options for your bundle show up. So you can leave all of those selected unless you want to uncheck specific ones, and you can hit save. You'll now see that multiple relations are created under your robot bundle type for everything that you just brought in. Additionally, you'll have all the different types defined at the bottom below your bundle. And now the last thing you're going to want to do is, again, But once you've clicked on the robot bundle, you're going to want to go from relationships to associations at the bottom of your screen. And you want to make sure you define a type association. So that's going to link your product to that constraint builder. So an object entity, you want to make sure you've got product selected, and object to map, you'll look again for your product, your robot bundle in this example, but whatever product you're configuring in the constraint builder, and you'll hit save. Now the relationship is established with your bundle. Now you can save at this point what you've got built so far in your constraint builder. It's saved. Once that's saved, you've got an initial version of your constraint builder. But now no rules have been created so far in this. So all that you've done at this point is define everything that goes into your constraint. And now we can work with those attributes and those product options to build rules around them. Let's quickly jump back to our document first to see the first rule that we're going to go through. All right. So we've created our CML for our robot. That's created. We created the relationships and the attributes, and we linked our type to the robot bundle. So the first rule that we're going to create is a basic constraint table. So that's going to enforce relationships between two different attributes, right? So you're essentially creating a table that matches payload capacity requirement attribute values to terrain adaptation level attribute values. So when one is light, the other one should be low, medium, medium, heavy, heavy. And if this is not matched, then you're going to get an error message. That's the last portion of the syntax in that constraint line that we're going to add into our constraint builder. If we jump back into our constraint builder, and we want to create that in our robot bundle type, not below this, because all those attributes are built within the robot builder. Let me simply grab that existing line there. So again, we're building a constraint. First parameter that we're passing into our constraint is that it's a table. So you can build constraints that are not table, but in this case, we are building a table. And then we're saying, here's the first attribute, the second attribute, and now we're creating the map of the different attribute values that can be mapped to one another. You can have more than one for every one value, right? So light could match to both low and medium. So you would create one more entry for that. Right now, you cannot bring in those values from a table. That's apparently roadmap, but right now you have to hard code those values in your constraint builder. So what does that look like if we save and activate our constraint model? So I've got this set up. My code is valid, no errors. I can again hit save. And now I can activate this, and we'll go on a quote and we'll test if that's working as expected. So going back to our quote in Salesforce, we'll browse catalog and we'll go in and add our bundle. If I go into the configuration for my robot bundle, I'll get all my different options and my different attributes that are available within the configurator. And now what we should see is that table mapping constraint rather that enforces those selections. So if I select light on my payload capacity requirement, the terrain adaptation level goes to low as well. If I go to heavy on the payload capacity requirement, I get heavy there, and I'm constrained, so I can't select any other values in that terrain adaptation level attribute pick list. So that was the constraint with a table option. Let's then look at the next rule that we're going to build in our constraint builder. Next one we're going to look for is a require rule. So we'll see how we can define that one product being selected or an attribute being selected enforces another product to be selected or an attribute value. So in our example, we'll say that if the operating mode is set to fully autonomous, then the basic safety kit is required. And then we also have a message that could show up, although it should not because our requirement is always going to be met. That's going to get the basic safety kit will get auto selected. So let's jump back into our constraint model. We'll deactivate this before we make any changes. Hit OK, and then we'll add that line below our constraint table. Adding that line into our constraint builder, right? Again, the syntax for this rule is require, is the rule type that we're adding in. And now we're saying, what's our condition? So the condition is that operating mode, our pick list that's defined, our attribute rather, that's defined as a pick list up here. If it is set to fully autonomous, then we require basic safety kit to be selected. And then the explanation message would be that fully autonomous mode requires the basic safety kit. Now that message again will not show up unless our requirement is not fulfilled, which it should be unless it's impossible to, if you get an error as you're configuring. But really that should simply auto select the basic safety kit if I set this to fully autonomous. So let's again save and activate our model. Let's head back to our quote. We'll refresh and we'll add our product again. So we'll go to our robots catalog. We'll add into configuration. And so what we want to look at now is that under the safety, accessories and option, we'll make sure that our operating mode is now semi-autonomous. We'll select the advanced safety kit. And now let's see what happens if I change from semi-autonomous to fully autonomous. So what we expect is that the basic safety kit will now be selected within that section. And we see that it's now selected. So that's working as expected. Now we can build on top of this. So you can have chaining within your require rule, right? So we can say that if this is set to fully autonomous, then basic safety kit should be selected, but also emergency stop should be selected anytime that basic safety kit is selected as well. So if we go in and add that rule as well in our CML, so let's jump back quickly on into our constraint builder. Let's deactivate this. Hit OK. And again, below our require rule that we just built, let's add one more. And again, the syntax is, so if basic safety kit is selected, we require emergency stop to also be selected. So basic safety kit requires an emergency stop button. So we'll, again, hit save and we'll reactivate our constraint builder and head back onto our quote. Let's simply cancel out of our configuration screen and head back to the configuration screen again for the bundle. So if we go to safety, accessories, and option, because our operating mode defaulted to fully autonomous, we can see that everything is auto-selected. But if I try to uncheck this, any of those, they're going to get selected again because this is not simply a suggestion. It should be enforced. But if we go ahead and select semi-autonomous now and uncheck both basic safety kit, there we go. It actually happened as we deselected because the rule works both ways, right? So one is required if the other. So we'll simply go in, uncheck basic safety kit. Now emergency stop has been unchecked as well. So if we change the operating mode to fully autonomous, right, we should see the chaining of our rules selected. So fully autonomous requires the basic safety kit, and then the basic safety kit requires the emergency stop. So changing that one value should lead into the two selections being made with only one line, two lines that we've got in our constraint model. There we go. So that changes got added in, and our rule has been followed as expected. So that was the require rules, and now you can chain them together. Now let's head back into our document and see the next rule that we're going to go through. Next rule we're going to look at is the preference rule type. The preference rule type is going to be somewhat similar to the constraint in that it might auto-select either an attribute or a product, but it's not going to work like the constraint because it's not going to enforce that requirement. So it's going to potentially auto-select your attribute value, but it's going to let the user change it to something else. So in this example, we're saying that if the payload capacity requirement is heavy, then the terrain adaptation level should be heavy as well, because the heavy payload typically requires heavy terrain adaptation, but that's only a preference. It's going to auto-select, but not enforce that afterwards. So heading back into our constraint builder, we'll do a couple things to make sure we can test that correctly. So we'll first deactivate that active constraint builder, and we'll first comment out our constraint table because that's going to break our test if we leave that on there, because that's going to enforce that heavy equals heavy. Now we simply want a preference if one goes the other way. So again, looking at the sequencing or the syntax for this rule. So we're saying it's a preference that if payload capacity requirement is equal to heavy, then terrain adaptation level should also be set to heavy. And our explanation message is that heavy payload typically requires heavy terrain adaptation. So we'll save this updated value. And again, we'll go in and activate, jump back into our quote. We'll cancel this configuration and we'll hit back our configuration. And then we're going to test that new updated model. Right. So in our new model now, we don't have any relationship. So payload capacity requirement is set to light, but adaptation level is set to medium. Now, if we set payload capacity requirement to heavy to test this out, as we can see, the terrain adaptation level is now set to heavy as well. Where our constraint forced us to have that value for heavy, now it's not enforced anymore. So I could go ahead and change that value to low. My payload capacity requirement will stay to heavy. We will get a message. Heavy payload typically requires heavy terrain adaptation, but that message is simply informational in that it does not stop us from going forward and saving and exiting our current configuration. Next rule we'll look at is how to exclude specific products based on other selections. So if you want to automatically remove or prevent the addition the specific component from a relationship, right? So a product option based on other selections. Our example, we'll look at if we set mobility type to wheeled, then we should exclude the track base from being selected as an option within the bundle. Jumping back into Salesforce, again, we'll cancel out of our current configuration on our quote, head back into your constraint builder. We can now deactivate this current model. Is that okay? And again, we'll go add one line within our robot bundle type in the constraint model. Let's add a line for our exclude rule. Looking through the syntax for the exclude rule, we're seeing that if mobility type, which again is an attribute, a pick list attribute, it's defined on top here, is equal to wheeled, then we should be excluding the track base, which is a relationship we can see down here, right? And also defined within our bundle, track base. So that product option should not be available for selection if mobility type is set to wheeled. So again, save our model and reactivate it. And then we can head back to our quote and test this value. So again, I headed back into our configuration for our bundle. Let's make sure we're looking at mobility options on here. So right now, before we head back into our bundle, let's actually deactivate our current model and we'll set a default value for mobility type so that it's set to something else than mobility by default, to wheeled by default. So if you add a line just above your attribute and you go and set a default value, and we'll say that the default value for our mobility type attribute is going to be tracked. So simply type that in. So you want default value equals the value that you want just above your attribute where it's defined. And now we can save this and activate. And we'll add back into our bundle. So we'll again cancel our current configuration and reopen that configuration to test that new scenario. As you're looking at the product option, make sure if we want to see what's happening, we'll make sure we select our mobility option. So right now we see the track base is available. But if we change the mobility type up to wheeled, we should see our track base disappear from selection. There we go. So that's not available for selection anymore because our condition has been met for that exclude rule. Next, we're going to look at a conditional constraint. So we'll see if we have specific conditions set and see what that can look like in our configuration screen. So again, back to your constraint builder. So you're going to make sure you deactivate your current model. And then we're going to want to, again, add one more line below our current rules. So we'll add this new line, which is a constraint. And we're saying if terrain adaptation level equals heavy, then max payload, which is a number attribute, should be greater than 1,000. And our explanation message saying that heavy terrain adaptation requires a max payload that's greater than 1,000. So we'll save this. And again, we'll reactivate and go in and test what happens with that new rule set. So let's go in and configure that bundle. We'll first define a value for our max payload. So we'll say that we'll set it to 950. And now we'll set our terrain adaptation level to back on our bundle configuration. We've got a couple different options here. So what we want to test now is that terrain adaptation level. If it's heavy, then max payload should be greater than 1,000. So if I currently have a blank value on max payload, what this means is that I can't select heavy at this point because I don't have a value. Even if I set this to 950, because the rule engine works both ways, I still can't select my terrain adaptation level. If I set this to 1,500 now, my terrain adaptation level can be set to heavy now. So I can go ahead and set this to heavy. Now, the option that I do have now, because that's a number field and not a pick list, so I'm not restricted by my input because it's manual input. But if I do go ahead and set this to 950, what will happen is that my error message will show up because I'm now trying to set up an impossible configuration. So heavy terrain adaptation requires a max payload greater than 1,000. So now, as you can see, that's an error message, which actually stops you in your track as you're building this. So you cannot save your configuration as long as you've got a configuration that is not compatible with your constraint engine. So if you reselect this and update this to 1,500, now your configuration is going to be fine and you can actually save and exit out of your screen at this point. The next rule we want to look at is a rule type of message. So if you simply want to display a message in your configuration, so not do any pre-selections on the user, so you want to display what should happen or what might happen based on the current configuration, And you have different types of messages. It can be purely informational, and that it will not stop the user in its track. It can be a warning, which is going to stop the user from creating an order out of this quote. So they will be able to save their configuration, but they won't be able to move on the quote to an order. Or it can be simply an error, which is going to stop them from even saving the configuration, similar to what we've seen with the constraint. If it's not met, you cannot save out of your current configuration. So if we go in and add that new message in our constraint builder, so let's save out of this current configuration, hit OK, head back to your constraint builder, and again, we'll deactivate. We'll go in and add that new message on here. So again, what we're saying here is that if the message will show up, if mobility type is set to legged, terrain adaptation level is set to low, the user will get a warning. So the error message is the third part here, or the second part rather, of the syntax of my message. And then the last portion of my message is going to be where you define if it's an informational message, a warning, or an error. So now this is going to show a warning to your user. So they are going to be able to save the configuration. It's going to tell them that error message. Let's save and try that new configuration. We'll activate our model, head back to our quote. Let's head into the configuration for our bundle. And now we'll set the mobility type to legged, and we'll set the terrain adaptation level to low. And we should see our message show up on our screen now that tells us that this is not a correct configuration, right? So we're now getting a warning. Like mobility might be unstable and low adaptation terrain. So we can save out of our configurator if we chose to, but again, we won't be able to move on to this and create an order from that quote. So you will be forced to fix that error before you can move on and create an order for this. The next rule we're going to look at is a couple different rules on how you can hide and disable specific either attributes or options within your bundle. And that can be done not only based on other values within your bundle and attributes, but it can also be done based on fields at the quote header level or at the quote line level. So let's see how you could do that in the constraint model. So again, let's jump out of our configurator screen and then back into our constraint builder. Again, first step will be to deactivate our current version. And we'll see how we can import first the quote field header value and then use that as a condition within our different rules. So we'll first add, and that's gotta be at the top of your model. So you want to bring in from your sales transaction context, you want to bring in the hide and disable value, which is simply a checkbox that I've got on my quote called hide and disable. It's purely for testing, but obviously that could be coming in from any field values that you've got on your quote. So I'm bringing that as an external. It's a Boolean because it's a checkbox, and the name is hide and disable. So now how can I use this in my rules at the bottom? I'll paste in a couple different values, and we'll see the effect that those can have within the configuration model. So I've added a couple rules on there. They're all based on that hide and disable being set to true. Obviously, it could go both ways if you needed to, or be based on other types of field if you needed to. But I'm creating a couple different things. So the first one is I want to hide. And when you're creating a rule that hides, and we'll just modify the layout here so we see those two together. So when you're creating a rule to hide, you can do it on either a relation, so a product option, or an attribute. And you can either hide an attribute specific value. So in this case here, so I'm saying, all right, my rule, if hide and disable is equal to true, I want to hide an attribute, and I want to add an attribute within the operating mode attribute, right, which is defined up here. And then in this scenario, I simply want to hide a specific value. I want to hide semi-autonomous. You could, as we've done in that one below, you could hide the entire attribute if you wanted to. So in this scenario here, I'm saying, well, in this case, I'm disabling, but you could either disable or hide rather the entire attribute. So if you don't specify values, you're going to disable or hide the entire attribute. And then for relationships, you can either hide or disable the relationship, right? So we're saying here in this scenario, if hide and disable is true again, we want to hide, but this time not an attribute, we want to hide a relation. The relation that we want to hide is the wheeled base, right? So we've defined that wheeled base option here in our model. And the type is wheeled base, right? So the relation name here, wheeled base, The actual type, wheeled base with capital W and B, is what's defined here as being hidden. The other thing that I've got here is very similar. Difference simply being that we go from hide to disable. So we're disabling the relationship for the advanced sensor suite, type advanced sensor suite, if that hide and disable is true. Let's see what that looks like on our quote now. So if I save my constraint model again, hit activate, let's head back to our quote. We'll simply close out of the browse lines for now, go into details, and we'll go in and set that hide and disable checkbox to true. Hit save, and let's head back to the configurator. So again, within my catalog, I'll select my robot bundle, go into the configuration. Now that should look fairly different because we're hiding and disabling a couple different things, right? So we've disabled max payload. So max payload can now not be modified anymore because that one has been disabled. We also decided to hide a value within operating mode, right? So now I can only select fully autonomous. I don't have any other option because that other value has been disabled or hidden, rather, in this case. We've also, under the sensor suite, so if we go into our sensor option, we've disabled the advanced sensor suite option. If we go under mobility option, we've also hidden the wheeled option so that one is not showing up anymore under these options because it's hidden because that checkbox is true. So that would allow you a couple different things, right? Maybe it's dynamic. Maybe that field value at the quote level is calculated dynamically, but it could also be coming in from a custom permission for your user. So maybe you want some users to have access to some attributes and some not. So if you're setting that as a formula coming from a custom permission, for example, then you could control which attributes they can see. So if we go back the other way, uncheck that hide and disable and go back to our robot, now we'll see our configurator as it was before that last modification, because now that value is false, so max payload is available. I can change my operating mode as well to semi-autonomous if I chose to at this point. And in our mobility option, we have our wheeled base back as an option. Now, the next rule we want to look at is transaction scope rule. So if you wanted to create rules where you auto add products based on other products being present on your quote, for example, that's the next one we're going to look at. So first thing we're going to want to do here is add that product to our quote so it's available for testing. So we'll go in and it's being added now. We should have our quote line item added to our quote for our bundle now. So that one is on here now. But let's say we want other products to be auto added based on either that product being on here or that product and additional conditions being on here. So what does that look like in the constraint model? The first thing we'll need to do in our constraint model, again, deactivate. But second thing we're going to want to do is also import the other products that you want to auto add based on different rules. So we'll go ahead and create a new type for those additional products. Let's call the first one warranty, and we'll bring in the warranty product. No parent type to be selected. You simply create that warranty. On the warranty, you're going to, again, go to association to the bottom. So no need to bring in either attributes or relationships. Those are flat products, but even if they were not right now, all I want is to auto add those products regardless of attributes and relationships. So what I'll do now is on warranty at the bottom, associations, under type association, we're going to create an association and we're going to link product to the warranty product that exists in our environment. And we'll create a new type again. And that one is going to be for the extended, let's call it extended warranty. Again, no parent type. We're going to create this, click on your new type for extended warranty, and under type associations, again, create an association and link it to the extended warranty within your model. Now that this is done, you can do a quick save, and then we'll go in and modify our model to take this into account. So when you do need to create transaction scope rules, we'll add this at the bottom of our model right now. So you need to create a virtual quote in your constraint model. I'm going to go ahead and paste in all the full quote code that I need to have in there, but we'll walk through this. So what you're creating really in your constraint model, first, you're going to define that this is a virtual quote. So virtual equals true. And then we're creating our type quote. The first thing we're defining is we're creating an integer to calculate values downstream. So it's called heavy payload count that we're going to use to count the number of bundles, robot bundles, where our payload capacity requirement equals heavy. And that's going to define some of those rules that we're defining downstream. And then you want to create a context node for the sales transaction item for every one of the products that are going to be required in the different rules that you're writing, right? So I'm importing essentially creating the relation for my robot bundle that we've already created above here, right? That's the initial type that we created. So we're recreating this in our virtual quote robot bundle. And then within that robot bundle, I'm reusing that integer that I defined at the top there. So every payload count is equal to the count of the robot bundle where payload capacity requirement equals heavy. I'm also bringing in the warranty product we just created and the extended warranty product we just created. And then I'm writing the rules that are going to be built on this. Let's first save. Once your updated model has been saved, just walk through the rules that we've just built for this. Rules that we've built are as follows. So we've built a require rule that says that if we have a robot bundle, the warranty is also required. With the message that the robot requires a warranty, that should not show up because the warranty will be auto added to our quote if we have the robot bundle added on. The other rule that we've got on there is we are looking at within the robot bundle, we're looking at the heavy payload count, which we've defined as the count of bundles where payload capacity requirement equals heavy. And if that's greater than 3, then we need the extended warranty. So orders with greater than 3 heavy payload robots require an additional warranty check. Now that this is built, let's reactivate our model, add back onto our quote. First test we can do is as simple as modifying any value in your line editor and triggering a save on your quote to see if we get the warranty added on automatically, which should happen because we have our robot bundle on our quote. So we can see that the warranty product is now auto added, not the extended warranty because we're not meeting the requirements of our second rule. But if we now go in, modify our bundle to say that the payload capacity requirements are heavy now, no need to modify anything else. We'll save and exit, but now we still won't get that extended warranty because we only have one of those bundles so far. So what should happen is that if we go ahead and change that advanced delivery robot bundle to 4, now we should meet our updated requirements for our rule. And we save this again. And now that that updated value is saved, we should get our extended warranty auto added to our quote. Seems we got a little error on save. Let's try this again. Change the quantity to 4 on your product. Let's hit save on your quote. Give that a second to save and update. And we'll get our updated quote with the new product added on. There we go. So now that our robot bundle has been updated to 4, we get the extended warranty added to our quote automatically as well. So you can build obviously different types of rules. It could be message rules as well. It could be different rules that you decide to write at the transaction scope that are going to be affected that at the quote level to auto add product, for example. So this was our deep dive on how you can implement the advanced configurator for a new bundle that you're setting up in your environment. As usual, thanks for watching. If you like the content that you're seeing, please take a moment to subscribe. Appreciate it. If you want to know what the code looks like for that advanced configurator bundle that we just set up, I'll make sure that this is available on our blog. So visit our website, thecloudupdate.co, to get the full code example that you can reuse and modify according to your requirements. Thanks for watching and have a good day.